The latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Joining us from Bengaluru is Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, India's former head of the National Security Advisory Board, also been an envoy to Russia, to Ireland, and the Czech Republic. Ambassador, добрый вечер, очень приятно видеть вам.
Very nice to see you since we are both back in India.
That's true. Also from Moscow, we're joined by the Carnegie Director of the Moscow Centre, Dr. Dmitri Trenin. Доктор Тренин, очень приятно видеть вами. Спасибо за ваше времени.
Спасибо за ваше приглашение. Очень приятно видеть вас. И господина посла тоже.
It's our pleasure. Apologies for that broken Russian there. But just looking at External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's visit, there was a press conference that he held with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov as well. But I just want to play out what the External Affairs Minister said at IMIMO yesterday at the Primakov Institute, because even at the press conference today, he mentioned that Afghanistan took up a lot of time during the bilateral discussions. This is what the External Affairs Minister had to say at the Primakov Institute.
Referred to the erstwhile Northern Alliance. It was not just us, it was also Iran was involved in it. And yesterday on my way to Moscow, I actually stopped in Tehran, and I had a chance to call on the president-elect, Ayatollah Raisi, and to meet my counterpart Javad Zarif, and clearly we discussed Afghanistan in some detail.
Ambassador, just before that, there was a stopover in Tehran where he was hosted by Javad Zarif. He met President-elect Raisi as well. That coincidentally or not happened while a Taliban delegation led by Stanikzai from the Doha office was also present there with other Afghan leaders. And when he went to Moscow, the EM, I mean, there was another Taliban delegation there meeting the Russians. Coincidentally or not, while we do know that India has apparently opened talks or some channel with Taliban as well. Afghanistan, Ambassador, India and Russia, are we on the same page?
Yes, we are certainly on the same page, particularly now after the Americans are rather precipitately withdrawing from Afghanistan. Actually, it was very telling. The External Affairs Minister specifically mentioned the Northern Alliance. And therefore, it's not a coincidence. It may or may not be a coincidence that the Taliban were there in both stations. I don't want to comment on that, but it's certainly not a coincidence that he stopped over in Iran on his way to Russia, and he mentioned the Northern Alliance. It is, in fact, India, Russia, and Iran who have very, very convergent interests in Afghanistan. And I'm sure that is what determined the timing of the Foreign Minister or External Affairs Minister's visit to Russia at this stage as well.
Dr. Trenin, when we look at how, say, the special representative of Russia to Afghanistan, Kabulov, has been giving comments earlier, maybe a couple of months back, he called for interim government. That's something that probably India has not been doing. It's been supporting what we call the legitimately elected government of President Ghani. What's your take on Afghanistan, and India, and Russia?
Well, I think that the Russians, looking at Afghanistan, have learned quite a few lessons. And one lesson that they learn is that this is something that you can see being played out by Russia in the Middle East. You have to deal with the realities, whether you like them or not. And I think that another interesting visit that comes into play in this regard is a visit to Moscow, of course, as you mentioned, of a Taliban delegation. It is a bit amusing that the Taliban leaders are making a stop in Moscow or traveling to Moscow, even though the Taliban is actually banned in Russia as a terrorist organization by order of the Russian courts. But you have to deal with the realities. The most important thing for Russia is that Afghanistan does not become, again, a generator of tension, a hotbed of extremism that might flow over beyond its borders. That's the most important thing. What happens within Afghanistan is up to the Afghans to sort out.
Right. Ashish Kumar, in fact, was asking a question of why the Russians were avoiding India a couple of months back. That was, of course, the quadrilateral meeting where India was not invited, and both sides officially at least said that that was not the forum. Going on to another big area where there would have been some discussion. Again, I want to play out a soundbite of the External Affairs Minister at the Primakov Institute when he was asked how India saw the rise of China.
We've had a very stable relationship with China. It is, I'm not saying that there were no issues and challenges in the relationship, but it has been very stable. And it saw a big economic element. China essentially emerged as our second largest trade partner. But for the last 1 year, there has been a lot of concern about the relationship because, China has not observed agreements that it had signed up to when it came to our border. After 45 years, we actually had a border incident with casualties, and peace and tranquility on the border for any country is the foundation of a relationship with a neighbor. So naturally, if the foundation has got disturbed, so has the relationship.
The foundation has got disturbed, Ambassador. How does the Russia-India, Russia-China separately, and equation really work?
I'm afraid I missed part of your question in between because of the line. Could you repeat it, please?
Just asking you, Ambassador, how you see Russia-India, Russia-China separately. Both have strategic partnerships, and the fallout of what happened post-Galwan. How does Russia balance itself between China and India?
Actually, the External Affairs Minister addressed this in a couple of his statements, both in Moscow and outside. We are living in a world which has multiple dynamics, which asks of countries to build relationships depending on their interests in particular regions, in particular areas, in particular on particular subjects. So, just as India has diversified its relations beyond Russia to a number of other countries, including, of course, notably the US. The dynamics of the Russia-China relationship has also developed very rapidly from 2000 onwards, and even more rapidly since 2014 because of the Russia-West face-off. So we understand that. The point that actually you say about strategic partners is that they need to be sensitive to each other's core security concerns, even while they pursue their interests with other partners. And I think that is the test to which we put Russia, to. That is the test Russia puts us to vis-a-vis the US. We put Russia to the test vis-a-vis China. So while there are enormous commonalities between Russia and China, we need to make sure that they do not affect our course. We do not act in such a way as to impinge on Russia's core security concerns, and Russia equally does not act in such a way as to impinge on our security concerns. And I think if you look at what has happened over the last year, particularly during the COVID period, during the period of our face-off with China, we have seen this. We have seen how Russia has positioned itself without denying its strategic partnership with China, but has positioned itself in such a way as to assure us that our strategic and security interests will remain, sensitive to our core strategic and security interests. And I think that's basically how it is. I mean, these are the age of triangles. You have various countries triangulating in order to protect their interests in various areas. And if you look at India, US, Russia, I mean, I would say that the India-US is actually protecting our interests in the maritime domain. India-Russia protects our interests in the continental domain. So there's a very clear continental dimension to our strategic outlook and a maritime. And what we are trying to do, incidentally, to get a little bit ahead of the game, is in our act Far East and in our Chennai Vladivostok corridor, what we are trying to do is to somehow link the two. And that's a bit beyond your question, but anyway.
Sure. Dr. Trenin, feel free to go beyond my question again. Now, if you talk about India having problems with China, but then similarly, like India's relationship with the US is a bugbear, so as to speak, with Moscow.
He's on mute, I think.
Dr. Trenin, I think you'll need to unmute yourself. Just trying to get Dr. Dmitri Trenin, who's the director of Carnegie's Moscow Centre, there back on. The question we had asked him was how Moscow views India's relationship with the US, since India has been having problems post-Galwan and the virtual tearing up of all agreements with China. Dr. Trenin, just checking whether you can hear us? No, we don't seem to have your audio at all, Dr. Trenin. Anyway, while Dr. Trenin figures that one out, Ambassador, just coming back to you now, you're talking about Moscow taking care of India's security concerns vis-a-vis China and vice versa. What happens when it comes to Russia providing the S-400s to both New Delhi and Beijing?
I think you can now hear me. Yeah, you see, one manifestation was that during this period of our face-off with China, when our defense minister and our external affairs minister were both in Moscow at different times, we got very clear reassurance from Russia that the S-400 supplies will go on as planned. And in fact, our defense minister even suggested that they may be accelerated, the supply may be accelerated. But now, the other thing, this comes back to what I said about core security interests. Yes, Russia has a very strong military technical cooperation with China. So does it have with India. And this is where, we need assurances very clearly that what is being supplied to our adversaries is not something that will put our weaponry in danger and our security in danger. And that is something that is a matter of confidential discussion between the leaderships, but I'm sure that has taken place. And I'm sure we should not go just by the name of the weaponry that is supplied to different countries. The same name can hide different accessories, different capabilities, and different add-on systems to it. So we need to be assured at any given stage that what is being supplied to us, or rather what is being supplied to our adversaries, does not put our weaponry at a disadvantage.
Right, and just checking, Dr. Trenin, can you hear us? There still seems to be a problem. So what I'm going to request you, Dr. Trenin, to do is I'm going to remove you from here. If you could click the link again in StreamYard and come back. Right. you're saying, Ambassador, that the same weaponry can be provided to both India and China. But does India expect anything from Moscow in terms of support on China, or like we saw last time round, both at, I think it was the SCO and on the sidelines of the RIC, where it was just the possibility of meeting was there at a different forum, and we saw both the Indian defense and foreign ministers meeting the Chinese and foreign and defense minister there. How does that angle work when two of the three partners, RIC, I mean, have a problem with each other? What is the role of the third?
I think Russia made it very clear in its official statements. Russia said that they have offered essentially their soil for the opportunity for the Indian and Chinese ministers to get together and talk. Now, there is no need for good offices. There is no need for mediation when countries know perfectly well what their interests are, and the countries know and have been interacting with each other. I mean, this is not like the Israelis and the Palestinians. These are countries that deal with each other. They have embassies in each other's countries. They have multiple channels of communication. So what we do not actually require a mediation. But of course, it would have been very difficult for the External Affairs Minister to travel to China to meet his counterpart, or for the Chinese Minister to travel to India for discussions. And therefore, Russia, being a trusted partner of both, provided the ground to meet, and that was very welcome for us. It is something that we welcomed a lot.
Fingers crossed, Dr. Trenin, that we can hear you now.
I hope you do.
Yeah, we can.
Very
okay.
good.
So let me go back to the initial, what you were talking about, which is how does Moscow take India's relationship with the US and other Western powers?
Well, I think that India and Russia are facing a new test to their relationship. And the test is that basically India and the United States and Russia and India, let's say, is partnering with a country that is in confrontation with Russia, whereas Russia is partnering with a country that has a very difficult relationship with India. So that's a new test of the relationship. We did not have it before. And I think on the experience of the last couple of years, both countries are actually passing that test. There is nothing in Russia's relations with China that works to the detriment of India. And the hope on the Russian side clearly is that there will be nothing in India's relations with the United States that will come at the expense of Russia or to the detriment of Russia. I think this is a sign of a more complex international environment than the environment in which Indo-Russian relations have been developing so far. And I would say that for Russia, this was restated in the most recently released Russian national security strategy. India and China are the two principal partners in Asia. And I would say the two principal partners among the great powers of the world. And they come in the same line in this very important Russian document. So I wouldn't worry that Russia is somehow trailing China, following China, taking China's line and its relations with other countries. I think Russia is adamant that it stays an independent and sovereign country, freely deciding upon its foreign policy course. And India, and like China, is Russia's neighbor in Eurasia and a very important partner. And I hope that Russia will be trying, as it has been trying so far, to make whatever it can to help facilitate, let's say, a happier relationship between Delhi and Beijing.
While it does that, Dr. Trenin, now we talked to the ambassador about the S-400s as well, which are being provided. Beijing already has, I think, a squadron, if not more than that. India should be getting it by September. Maybe they're waiting for the summit when President Putin comes here. But Russia will not give in to any pressure. S-400s, it wasn't just the S-400s. When there was the issue about Galvan, whether it was aircraft, whether it was ammunition, India went to Russia. Rajnath Singh, our defense minister, was there asking for equipment that would have been possibly used against the Chinese.
Well, I think that this is a test now for Russia's foreign policy. I think it would be very important for Russia to show to India and China, the rest of the world, and I would say primarily to itself, that its policies cannot be impacted upon by third players, third countries. India has been a privileged buyer of Russian weaponry, of Russian military technology. The S-400 is something that right now is a flagship of the Russian defense industry. For a long time, the technological level of the weaponry supplied to India was above the level supplied to China. For obvious historical reasons, we needn't go into that. And I don't think that the situation will change. So we'll see how it goes. And clearly there are countries, in this case, both China and the United States, who for different reasons are not very happy with Russia selling and and India buying the S-400s. Mm-hmm. But we'll see how it goes.
Sure. I mean, Gatsa still is there. Ambassador, on a different note, or another side of a coin, is where India and Russia are collaborating. Now, of course, Bangladesh and nuclear is something else. But I'm talking again in the defense field and BrahMos. Now that there's been a lot of interest by third countries, we're waiting for that export to third countries to also go through, whether it's in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, possibly even in the Gulf. Now that's one area where, again, we are cooperating, right, Master?
Yeah, most certainly we are cooperating. And I think it goes much beyond that. You know, you talk about the joint development of equipment. Not only that, the joint manufacture of equipment. Actually, this Make in India, which enables Russian companies to come to India and manufacture, can produce a whole range of systems and subsystems that can be exported to the countries where Russian weapon systems or even Soviet weapon systems operate in this entire region. So there are a number of opportunities there, and those have been recognized in our the Intergovernmental Commission for Military Technical Cooperation. And it's been mentioned also by our leaders from time to time in their various public statements.
Right. I just want to again go back to what the External Affairs Minister said at the Primakov Institute at IMO yesterday. This was on the Indo-Pacific, or as Russian foreign policy analysts like to call it, the Asia-Pacific.
If Russia acts like Russia, Russia will make its full contribution. I mean, when I speak today of a Chennai-Vladivostok maritime route, when we speak of Indian economic investments in the Far East, when Russia takes part in the East Asia Summit, all of that, to my mind, is very much part of Indo-Pacific.
I beg your pardon. Dr. Trenin, the Indo-Pacific, now that's even during the press conference, it was mentioned that there was a discussion on that. How has Russia moved any closer to India's vision of the Indo-Pacific? Of course, not the American.
Well, I think that there has been a better understanding of the Indian concept of the Indo-Pacific. I don't think that there is a disconnect, or not to speak of a conflict, between the Indian geopolitical vision and the Russian geopolitical vision. Russia is primarily a land power, so it looks at the continent of Asia, first of all, as its neighborhood. The Pacific thing has been adopted as part of the when Russia was looking at at developing relations not just with the Asian countries, but with the countries along the Pacific Rim. And that's when it was adopted in the mid-late 1980s. And I think that for Russia, Asia does certainly include India, does include Southeast Asia. This concept is, I think, much broader than the original concept of Asia Pacific developed in the United States that did not include India for a long time. So APEC summits, for example, did not include India for a long time because Asia Pacific was seen by many English speakers as Pacific Asia. That's a different view of geopolitics. For Russia, India is certainly one of the two major foreign, from Russian perspective, foreign powers on the Asian continent alongside China, and that's how the Russians view that. They clearly have a suspicion, and I think that Minister Lavrov and others have been voicing that suspicion that the similarly sounding American concept of Indo-Pacific is essentially a concept that targets China, that looks at the ways of containing China through alliances and partnerships with other countries. And that's something that the Russians will not accede to for very clear reasons. But the Indian concept is clearly different, and India is not an ally of the United States. India does not take guidance from the United States, as some of America's allies are taking. And I think there's more understanding for the Indian concept, but clearly the most important thing is real actions, how nations operate. Concepts are in many ways abstractions, but specific actions tell the real story, and I think that's what Russia is watching.
Ambassador, I think Varun Pratap has a question which I'm just trying to get on air. Are there any developments regarding pressing issues like India's participation in the Quad, which is a great concern for Russia? Now, despite publicly and openly saying that, say, the Quad or Indo-Pacific concept is inclusive, it's not the Quad, but Indo-Pacific is inclusive, is not targeted against China. At this moment, it really is being seen as that. So how does that dovetail into what we're trying to do with the Chennai-Vladivostok line, the Far East, the Russian Far East, that is, Ambassador?
Actually, I agree with Dr. Trenin that fundamentally geopolitical perspectives of India and Russia in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, they actually converge. The problem has been in some of the public messaging. And that public messaging is colored by the very acrimonious US-Russia standoff, particularly since 2014, and the very harsh rhetoric that the Trump administration put on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, according to Trump, the Indo-Pacific posture as spelled out in the Pentagon and also by the State Department, it basically is in terms of talking about regime change and a military posture vis-a-vis China. Now, what has happened, if you see what the Quad has been doing during the Trump administration, none of the other three countries subscribed to any one of these principles, and that is the reason why the Quad never had a joint statement during the entire period of the Trump administration. The first joint statement that the Quad made was after the Biden administration came, when Biden administration withdrew the earlier papers, the US papers on the Indo-Pacific. They talked about an inclusive Indo-Pacific, and they also, incidentally, it's not very much noticed even by our Russian friends. For the first time, the Quad talked about a rules-based order rooted in international law. The Russian objection has always been about this rules-based order being a Western order. But here they talked about international law. So my point is that to Russia has public, because of its standoff with the US, in my view, Russia has felt it necessary to really criticize Quad as something targeting Russia and China. Whereas very clearly it does target China, but it targets China not in this confrontationist manner. The whole idea of the Indo-Pacific is to draw China into a cooperative order in the Indo-Pacific. And then if you look at what President Putin says in his Greater Eurasian Partnership, that is exactly what he says. And if you see all the Valdai Club discussions on this, what they say is how can you draw China into a cooperative relationship? So this is where the Indian concept comes in, and this is where, by the way, I would also draw your attention to the press release that the Russian MFA issued just now on for External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's visit, where they said that they will be discussing security issues in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They did not say Indo-Pacific, but they did say in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, which is itself, in my view, an advance in Russian MFA formulations. President Putin has said, even in his summit in Vladivostok, he said that we discuss security in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So, it is a matter of public messaging. I think the Quad has suffered from an excess of rhetoric and a deficiency in public messaging. And if that can be corrected, there is no reason why Russia should not subscribe to it, keeping in view the sensitivities of the Chinese, which it always does have to.
Sure. Sensitivities of the Chinese as of now, but Dr. Trenin, how does President Putin and Russia really look at China in the medium to long term? Aren't they wary because of history and because of what China is doing now? You may have a strategic partnership with China, but how do you see it going down the line?
Well, I think that the medium-term projection is that the relationship will continue to develop, and there are no concerns at this point that the relationship will somehow find itself in hot water. The basis of the Sino-Russian relationship, and of course, as we all know, the 20-year-old Sino-Russian friendship treaty has been extended for another several years, and that it's just been done in the last few days. But the fundamental formula of the relationship is that we will never turn against each other, but we will never follow each other necessarily. This manages to marry reassurance and flexibility. So each country sees itself as a great power, meaning a sovereign agent on the global scene, and they cooperate on a number of areas where their interests meet, and those areas are quite extensive. On the other hand, there is no leader in that duo. There is no follower in that duo, and I think this will stay. This will stay as long as I think the Chinese remain realistic in their relationship with Russia, because should China, for whatever reason, I don't think it will happen under the Xi leadership, should China, for whatever reason, feel it is a superior power to Russia, should it start try to boss Russia around, should it lean hard on Russia, that will be the end of the relationship. We don't see signs of that. We see that some people among Chinese business community and elsewhere start to look down on Russia. This can still be managed. This does not happen at the political level, but should, for whatever reason and under whatever circumstances, go up to the political level, then the present relationship will not be sustained. I hope it doesn't happen, but that's the reality, and I think that the Chinese understand that.
Ambassador Raghavan, you want to add anything to that?
Well, not on the Russia-China relationship, but I do believe that some of the tone of the Russia-China relationship can get subtly altered based on the US-Russia relationship, because we must accept the geopolitical fact that a sustained US effort to sideline and isolate Russia has necessarily strengthened the Russia-China relationship. And therefore, and this is something, by the way, which President Biden probably indiscreetly said in his press conference after meeting President Putin. He sort of indicated that a slightly less hostile relationship between the US and Russia would give Russia greater political space vis-a-vis China. That is a geopolitical fact. I mean, it doesn't mean that there will be confrontation. It doesn't mean a return of the Kissinger type of strategy that the US adopted with China vis-a-vis the USSR. But it certainly does give Russia increased geopolitical space vis-a-vis China. So to that extent, I think there is this US-Russia-China relationship, that triangle, and the shape and the configuration of that triangle will affect the tone of the Russia-China relationship.
Mr. Raghavan, you were talking about the public messaging vis-a-vis the Quad. Now, what is the public messaging when the External Affairs Minister's next stop is going to be Georgia, the first visit to an independent Georgia? Is this a quid pro quo or tit for tat for Sergey Lavrov going to Pakistan after visiting New Delhi?
If you wanted to do a quid pro quo or tit for tat, then he should have gone to Ukraine, but he didn't. So,
but is a message being sent?
No, so a message is not being sent. Georgia, okay. Again, these are, as India takes a wider interest in the global scene, the South Caucasus is an important area. And if you look at the strategic positioning of Georgia between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, there are a number of interests that we can develop with Georgia. So, and it is not necessarily Georgia, as I said. Georgia is not in the same position vis-a-vis Russia as today's Ukrainian government is. I shouldn't have said Ukraine. You talk about the current Ukrainian government. So I don't think we should look at it as that, and I don't think, frankly, I for one do not see that Foreign Minister Lavrov was sending a message to India by going to Pakistan. It is different. You see, earlier, out of sensitivity for India, Russians would not go to Pakistan along with India. Now, that sensitivity made sense when the relationship was more exclusive. Now, it is no longer an exclusive relationship. We all have our different partners. Pakistan, among other things, has had great use for Russia in Afghanistan, vis-a-vis Afghanistan as well. So, I would basically, as I said, I would not judge visits and relationships on the basis of such demonstrations. I would judge them on the basis of their results. And as long as Russia doesn't do anything with Pakistan to act against our interests, I don't care. I mean, why not let him go? Why should you want him to go back to Russia and come back all the way to Pakistan? That makes sense.
Fair enough. Dr. Trenin, last words to you.
Well, I'm very much in agreement with what Ambassador Raghavan just said. This is no longer an exclusive relationship. This is a relationship in a much more complex world. And with regard to Georgia, I don't think that people here would believe that the External Affairs Minister's trip to Georgia is some sort of a balancing act for India's foreign policy. Similarly, for Russia, Pakistan is an important player in Afghanistan. And since Afghanistan is turning into more of a problem for Russia with the withdrawal of U.S. forces, U.S. and allied and partner forces from that country, Pakistan should be part of the equation for keeping a sort of stability around Afghanistan, if not within Afghanistan. So that would be, I think, as I said again, a sign of the times. We are living in a more complex world. And the most important thing is that we conserve, preserve, and develop the mainstay of Indo-Russian relations under very different circumstances. And I hope we'll be able to manage that. And I think that the External Affairs Minister's visit to Moscow is a testimony to that.
Ame Vadnekar, one of our regular viewers, Dr. Trenin, has a message for you and us. He says, please invite Dr. Trenin more often. So we're going to do that, and you'll have to say yes the next time we invite you as well, Dr. Trenin. Thank you so much for your
I'll be delighted. Thank you very much.
Expertise. Thank you so much. Spasibo большое.
Spasibo вам. Thank you.
And Ambassador Raghavan, absolutely a pleasure again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
The pleasure was all ours. Just a reminder to our viewers, you can go onto our website if you feel like supporting us financially, helping us do better and keep going. There's a link in the description on YouTube. Do also follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also click on the bell icon on YouTube to get notified for when we put up videos like this one. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to increase our numbers. You've been watching The Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.